Hey everyone, Jim Yort here, and today we are talking about regret, which is something that we've all experienced from time to time, whether it's that project that you screwed up at work, or that opportunity that you had that you let slip through your fingers, or the time that you blew up at someone. Or maybe you lost your temper at someone years ago, and nowadays it's not that you regret so much as the fact that you never apologized for it and never repaired that relationship. And now that person's out of your life and you wish it weren't so. So, whether it's those examples or however regret is showing up in your life, we can look at regret as both things that you've done and things you haven't done, and short term and long term. And basically what's going on with regret is there's a part of your brain that's acting sort of like a watchdog that's comparing the way things have turned out to the way things might have turned out for the better if only you had acted differently. And this is a part of you that's using that feeling of regret as sort of a wake-up call that's trying to sort of shake you out of it and say, hey, you've done something here that has caused pain to yourself or to someone else, or put you at a disadvantage, or you've acted in a way that's not consistent with your core values or your moral compass, right? This is a part of you that has an eye on your well-being in some way, and it's trying to shake you and snap you out of it and say, hey, you're not, this isn't us. Get back in line here. We learn those lessons pretty easily too. When you experience regret, it's pretty obvious. I screwed up. I understand why. Here's what I did. I wish I could go back in time and do it differently, but at least now I know what to do going forward. So up to that point, it's really a pretty healthy instinct. The problem happens is when that watchdog turns into like a bull terrier and grabs on and starts shaking and won't let go and keeps returning you over and over again to that regretful episode, even after you've learned your lesson. When that goes on long enough, that can start to impair your mental health, your self-esteem, your confidence, and it can put you at risk for making more unwise decisions and causing yourself more regret down the road. So I have a few tips for you today that will help you to sort of unwind this process and help keep yourself from being haunted by regret going forward. But before I do that, real quick, I want to go over a few really fundamental tendencies of the brain that enable the process of regret to occur. And when you understand those, then you'll understand the tips even better. The first is that your brain hates loose ends, unfinished tasks. And if you've ever experienced being called away in the middle of a task and then your mind kind of keeps returning to it, that you're not really fully present because you can't forget about the thing that you left unfinished, then you've experienced this phenomenon. And there's a name for it too. It's called the Zeigarnik effect. Okay, so that's number one, that our brains hate loose ends. The second one is that short-term regrets are usually caused by something that you've done, whereas long-term regrets usually relate to something you haven't done. Now, this is something that's been shown over and over again in the research. And it makes sense in light of that Zeigarnik effect I just told you about, right? Because if your mind is predisposed to return to unfinished business, then it stands to reason that things that you leave unfinished and don't follow through on are going to be sources of regret for you down the road. And that also explains why in that example I gave earlier, when you lost your temper at someone years ago, that regret may be having faded, but the regret about not having taken action to repair that relationship, that is the kind that can really stick with you. So if inaction is the thing that gives rise to long-term regret, then that brings us to number 3, which is the single biggest cause of inaction is fear. Now, freezing up or not taking action in the face of a fearful situation or the unknown is a natural response that's intended to help keep you safe. But the problem is that when we're faced with the unknown, with blanks, then our mind often steps in to fill in those blanks with its own assumptions, which often make the situation seem even scarier than it really is. And then increasingly we turn inward and make more and more assumptions and close off to the real world, to fresh information that might shed some light on our fear. So you might think of this one being like a child who is convinced that there's a monster living under the bed and pulls the covers up over their eyes to be invisible to the monster. But in doing so, they imagine the monster is just getting bigger. You know, the claws and teeth are getting bigger, and this thing's getting scarier and scarier the more they avoid it, right? So we do something very similar when we are faced with the unknown as adults. Okay, so now that we have a better understanding of what fuels the process of regret, let's get into some tips for how you can live in a way that's less likely to produce regret in your life. So the first one is to be open to new information and feedback. If a big part of the problem of regret are these blanks and the assumptions that our mind fills the blanks in with, then we can go a long way toward resolving regret by minimizing the number of blanks and minimizing the role that those assumptions play in our mind and in our life. So you can imagine, you know, that child afraid of the monster under their bed. Well, ask any parent who has, you know, banished that child's monster by going in and, you know, turning the lights on and getting on the floor with a flashlight with their kid and, you know, looking under the bed and seeing that there's no monster there, right? That can go a long way toward resolving that fear and really grounding someone in reality. So what I'm talking about in this tip then is really cultivating a sense of openness, of curiosity and awareness and acceptance of whatever is happening in your life, you know, not just at the time you're making a decision, but all the time. And, you know, a great way to do this is through the practice of mindfulness meditation, because mindfulness meditation is itself the practice of awareness, curiosity, and acceptance of whatever's coming up in your moment-to-moment experience of life. So if you can orient toward a more mindful way of living through practicing mindfulness meditation, which, by the way, you can go on my website, and I've got some guided meditations right there for you. But if you can do that, then when you're facing uncertainty, you'll be able to deal with that a lot better, because you'll be able to see the facts for what they are and see the blanks for what they are and notice your feelings for what they are too, and be able to respond wisely to those in a way that is consistent with your moral compass, with your long-term well-being, etc. And so less likely to give rise to regret. And also, you know, when something comes out of the blue and kind of throws you for a loop and you feel angry or sad or upset and you want to lash out, or you have some sort of reaction that would otherwise cause you trouble, well, when you're more mindful, you're better able to catch those strong emotions in the moment, notice them for what they are, realize that you're having them, and then pick a course of action that is wise, that it's a response as opposed to a reaction. Number two is to focus on intrinsic rewards and abstract goals. Now, people who follow me know that I talk about this all the time anyway, because, you know, decades of research have shown us that people who are motivated by things like money, material things, fame, right, objective things, tend to be much less happy than people who are intrinsically motivated by things that are more subjective, that you can't see and touch. But it turns out that when it comes to regret, there's yet another reason to focus on intrinsic rewards and abstract goals, which is that what they find is when people are engaged in an activity where there's some promise of an extrinsic reward, some kind of money or material good at the end, and then they're interrupted from that activity, they're much less likely to return to the activity and see it through than if the reward is intrinsic, right? And what did we learn earlier is that when we don't tie up loose ends, then that tends to be a primary cause for long-term regret. So yet one more reason to focus on intrinsics and abstract goals on top of all the other ones that I've given you guys in prior videos and articles. So I'll give you an example of reframing an extrinsic goal into an intrinsic one. So let's say that you have the goal of getting a couple of promotions within the next 5 years so that you end up being the CEO of your company. Okay, so that's a pretty concrete objective. It's and you're on sort of a tightrope with that goal, right? Because you either do or don't have that outcome? What if instead you said, over the next 5 years, I want to become way more competent at my job and better connected with my colleagues, so that there's a sense of camaraderie that infuses the work that I do each day? Okay, now we're talking intrinsics, because these are things that really only you know if you're feeling or not. They're unique to you, and they're more feelings and traits than they are concrete outcomes. So these are the kinds of goals that will help you feel happier in the long run, and will help keep you motivated in the long run too, as we just discussed in that research about regret, right? Now, does that mean that there's no place for concrete objectives? No, those are what you want to use in the short and midterm as milestones that are on your way to the long-term intrinsic goals. Okay, so there's a place for both. Just don't get the two mixed up. So number 3 is simple. It's pick an action and take it. Try to use the first 2 tips, but if you aren't successful in using one or both of them, it's okay. When in doubt, act. When you make a decision using the best information that you have available to you at the time, and you're well intended in that decision, then you don't leave as much of a foothold for regret to take hold. And you certainly eliminate the inaction that tends to give rise to long-term regret. So when you put these 3 tips together, turning on the lights when you're in a dark room of the unknown, and then cultivating a sense of presence and curiosity and awareness and mindfulness in your life, so that you can take stock of what you see and what you can't see, and what you know to be true about the situation and about yourself, and then practice acting on that, making decisions that are in alignment with the traits and qualities and feelings that you'd like to have. Then you leave less room for the shadows to creep in, and less room for regret to take hold in your life. Now you might be wondering, well, if I act more, if I take more action than I currently do, then isn't that going to expose me to more short-term regret? And the answer is yeah, it might. But I really kind of see that as a win-win. Because look, if you take action and it turns out to be successful, then great. But if it turns out not to be successful, at least you've acted and you've avoided that the inaction that gives rise to long-term regret, and you've learned something new probably about what makes you tick and what does and doesn't work for you. So, whether you take flight with your action, or you take action and sort of trip and get up and keep walking, that still beats being chained to the floor, the way I look at it. So that's what I have for you today. I hope that you found these tips helpful, and this discussion of regret helpful. If you did, please go down below and click like and share the video with other people who might benefit. And also please go check out my website at jimyort.com. There you can find the free guided meditations that I mentioned that I have for you if you'd like to start cultivating some mindfulness in your life today. And I also have a free brand new download for you called the Setback Survival Pack, which is a video and audio and PDF guide that helps you if you are reeling from some sort of unexpected setback in your life, whether it's job loss or bereavement or breakup, or found out your partner was cheating on you, you name it, and you're having trouble getting to sleep and you're obsessed with worried thoughts throughout the day, then go check out my download at jimyort.com/setback and grab that while you can, while it's still up, and it'll help walk you through some mind and body exercises, including some mindfulness related exercises that'll help you learn how to cope skillfully with that situation rather than reacting in a sort of short-term gratification oriented way, which is the way that we cause ourselves regret. So the Setback Survival Pack is really consistent with what we talked about today. So head on over to my website and grab that if you'd like. Thanks again for joining me, and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.